So first I'd like to start by introducing Pam Lewis, who is a Senior Program Officer with the New Economy Initiative for Southeast Michigan. The New Economy Initiative is a program of the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan, an unprecedented philanthropic project that used more than $130 million from 11 foundations to spur economic development by supporting innovation, entrepreneurship, and placemaking programs in the city of Detroit and the surrounding region. Next, we have Derek Olson, who is Vice President of Regional Strategy and Coordination at Greater Portland, Inc. Among other things, Derek leads the region's implementation of the Greater Portland Export Initiative, co-chairs the Foreign Direct Investment Pilot, and leads the initiative's work with the federal government and federal grant opportunities. As a side note, I was pleased to read in your bio, Derek, that you graduated from high school in Tigard, Oregon, a city's name that I learned to mispronounce several times in law school because of the famous case, Tigard. Everybody knows that case, right? No? Okay. Next, we have our own local example of innovation, Sandy Cedar, Assistant City Manager with the City of Longmont. Sandy is passionate about innovative technology and the amazing things that happen when people come together and dream about the future. And I'm especially excited to see her presentation and share it with you today because it is a Colorado example of the principles that we're talking about. And then finally, Brad Whitehead, who is president of the Fund for Our Economic Future, a collaboration of philanthropy in working to transform Northeast Ohio's economy. Since its inception in 2004, the fund has raised and deployed more than $70 million in grants in the areas of business growth and attraction, talent development, racial and economic inclusion, one of the key ideas that we talked about this morning, and government collaboration. So please join me in welcoming our fantastic panel. And we'll start with Pam Lewis. Come on up.
Thank you, Carolyn. Well, good morning. It is my pleasure to be here in your beautiful state, Colorado, talking to you about our work in Detroit. New Economy Initiative's relationship with the Brookings Foundation has really been a transformational one for us. The work of Bruce Katz and Julie Wagner and Amy has helped us to really understand and accelerate the momentum that's already happening in our city. Of course, a place that you know has had quite a bit of challenges. And their counsel is really allowing us to better position ourselves as a city of ideation, exploration, and commercialization by using the assets that are already there, particularly within a geographic area. So with that, I'm sure you're probably wondering, I didn't even there, why this date is on the screen, January 5th, 1914. On the subject of unleashing a metropolitan revolution, this is not the first time this has happened in the city of Detroit. When you think of Henry Ford's innovation, what do you typically think of? Cars, assembly line. But on this date, there was another innovation that would forever change America. On January 5th, Henry Ford announced the $5 a day wage. So this is a picture the day after that announcement. Over 10,000 individuals showed up to get hired. A week later, 12,000 showed up. Came out to get jobs. In a market where the average wage was around $2 for steel workers, coal miners, and auto workers, this innovation was actually revolutionary. Henry Ford did this to address an attrition problem. In doing so, the population of Detroit doubled and continued to grow for over 40 years until suburban sprawl began. Talent poured into the city from across the country and the world. This is when my family came to Detroit, making Detroit one of the more diverse communities to this day. An economist named Harley Scheichen actually recently quoted saying that the most important model that came out of that plant was not the Model T, it was actually the middle class. This was about more than technological innovation as it relates to an automobile or an assembly line, but the $5 wage was a societal innovation that changed ways of life for generations. So, here we are, 100 years later. Much has happened since then. You can see the articles in the New York Times or the photos of the abandoned and blighted areas around the city that often make Detroit look like one of Yul Brynner's Westworld sets. I'm dating myself. But I wanted to share another side, the activity and momentum that's actually happening within this 4.3 square mile geography. in the heart of our Midtown and downtown area, where you have philanthropic, private, and public leaders beginning to invest resources and time to change the narrative about Detroit, and more recently, following Amy's work and the discussions around innovation districts, are deciding to harness their collective power to intentionally combine the technological innovation happening in the city with societal innovation based on how leaders are working more collaboratively to improve the economic conditions. So Detroit's Innovation District, 4.3 square mile geography. The vision is to create a vibrant hub for people to live, work, and collaborate. In our minds, the Innovation District was nothing we needed to create from scratch, per se. It was already emerging, and Brookings' work was helping us to articulate that. There are economic and physical and entrepreneurial networking assets all within this space, including 2 research hospitals, 1 research university, a top creative design school, and within the last 5 or 6 years, approximately 30 entities that have been funded to support entrepreneurs and innovation. This is also a geography where philanthropy and private industry have led the charge in placemaking and actively attracting and drawing young talent to live and work here. My fingers aren't sticky enough. So just to give you a perspective on this district, let's take a snapshot of it as it relates to the whole city of Detroit. It represents 3% of the total city's landmass and 3% of the city's population, yet it holds over 50% of the jobs. The economic, physical, and entrepreneurial assets are here, and they reflect billions of dollars of investments. Alone, the New Economy Initiative has actually invested about $65 million within this district. So let me walk through the assets, because in the Innovation District work, they talk about these 3 assets working together: economic assets, physical assets, and entrepreneurial networking assets. Let's start with the economic assets. The Innovation District geography is anchored by 2 primary innovation and employment hubs: the cluster of predominantly private sector firms in Downtown Employment District and the University and Medical Center campuses in our northern Midtown District, which covers the upper part of Midtown through New Center. There's a new M1 rail line, which is slated to be completed in 2016, which is going to actually physically link these hubs. It's a 3-mile stretch that's happening from one end of the district to the other, with about 11 stops along the way. This is a perfect example of philanthropic and private and federal government. It's actually a perfect example of what Amy talked about with the flip, where you have about $100 million, there's a $140 million project. $100 million of it came actually from 15 donors to start. And then more recently, the federal government came in later. But downtown is the home, in terms of economic assets, of Dan Gilbert, who owns the Cleveland Cavaliers. His Quicken Loans company and his work in the city has really transformed the downtown area. He moved into town with his company in 2010, bringing 1,700 employees, but actually has grown to about 8,000 within the last 3 years. And then he's joined by, of course, our standing anchors, Henry Ford Health Systems, Detroit Medical Center, Detroit Edison, and others, all who are very active employers, but more than that, they're actually doing real estate development on their own campuses and also working together to increase their spending with Detroit-based businesses in a collaborative called the D2D procurement program. So these are some of the older economic players, and I want to introduce you to some of our newer ones. Shinola, Detroit Labs, Low Campbell Ewald, Skidmore Studios. And these are companies that have moved in or launched within Detroit within the last 5 years. Combined, they probably represent over 1,000 employees. Shinola has been active in employing residents, typically out-of-work plant workers, and utilizing the manufacturing prowess to assemble watches. They picked Detroit because they really wanted to build off of the grit of the city for their brand, as well as the manufacturing capability that was there. Just a perfect example of the economic asset of that. Detroit Labs is another cool story, where this is actually a startup that came out of one of our incubators that now employs 62 people. They were launched only 3 years ago. Physical assets: coffee houses, walkable alleys, retail, downtown parks that are all programmed through the year with events. This is actually happening in Detroit. That's been the work of primarily two players, a community development organization called Midtown Development, Inc., run by a woman who has been running that organization for 28 years. Her name is Sue Mosey. But this particular organization has been funded by the Hudson Weber Foundation. You've heard of J.L. Hudson Stores. So for 28 years, they've been funding her work, along with others, such as Kresge and the New Economy Initiative. Their investment basically has worked to also coordinate live, work, play programs, where they're incenting young talent to live in the district, those who are working in the district to actually live in the district. Currently in Midtown, with the real estate development, they're at about over 95% economic development occupancy capacity and growing. Some of our entrepreneurial and networking assets are TechTown. TechTown, this is the lobby of TechTown, where there are about 200 or so businesses that have been launched with the support of this organization, and they've probably touched around 820 entrepreneurs in the last 5 years. And across the street, you have Next Energy. Next Energy is our alternative energy accelerator and testing and validation site. They focus on power electronics, vehicle electrification. They leverage a lot of relationships with the OEMs in the area, and particularly are incubating some interesting products where you have companies like Qualcomm, who are interested in the connected vehicle space, moving into Detroit to partner with the OEMs and being incubated at Next Energy. And then others like Bisdom, who are also helping to support entrepreneurs. So in June, under the leadership of the mayor, the Innovation District thinking was officially accepted by the mayor, and an advisory committee was launched and formed to harness that collective power. The point of the Innovation District for Detroit was about getting all the leaders that were actually already working in these spaces around a common table to come up with a set of initiatives that could actually address a number of issues to solidify and promote the Innovation District in the order to leverage investment, attract talent, and also provide residents with more opportunity. I want to go through some of the problems that we're trying to address. Innovation and commercialization is the first problem. The issue is about outputs. Within the city that we live in, there's a lot of market-ready technology commercialization, but they aren't translating to, there are a lot of innovation and patents, but they're not translating to commercialized technology. And so the goal is to realize the potential of the emerging clusters within our area around digital healthcare, med devices, small batch manufacturing, and also mobility to drive those outcomes. Another subject is how do we grow Detroit's knowledge economy? The issue here is there's high employment rates among the citizens. Over 60% employed residents work outside of the city, and the current residents' skills are misaligned with the demands of the district employment opportunities. So what are some of the things that we can do to make that alignment better? One example has to do with offering a continuum of engagement involvement to employers working with schools and job training programs. How can we implement low-risk partnerships and internships, programs for not just students but also for adults, accompanied by training? And how can we improve the digital literacy and access in neighborhoods that are adjacent to the district? So we're exploring broadband and fiber optic solutions. As it relates to physical place, the issue here is there's still a percentage of the geography within that 4.3 square miles that's still vacant, that's made up of a lot of surface parking. And so we're working to upgrade the infrastructure of the public space. First of all, what we discovered at the work table was that it was not just about addressing the physical open land, the land mass at that area, but there's key infrastructure issues that needed to be addressed. Lighting, a lot of the alleys are collapsing. So what we're finding is a lot of the developers are having to spend their money to do this and to address these issues. And what we're coming up with is how can we identify some micro districts within the 4.3 square miles for developments considered around some catalytic real estate initiatives, like a mobility center or a manufacturing prototyping space. All work tables, what we're finding, are very coherent in some of their discussions. And so this is all very early work, We're just beginning, but the difficulty has been how to translate the concepts of what we've been reading about in these Innovation District conversations to actually making it make a difference in our city. The other key benefit has been that we have the mayor at the table. The mayor of the city of Detroit has really been the missing leg of our stool. Philanthropy and private industry has been there, and now we have the mayor who's leading, and that's really made a tremendous difference. So in most cities, these districts are being driven by a small group, but we have a very large number of stakeholders at play here. And like I said, we're just beginning, and there's a lot more to come. So I look forward to your questions.
Derek?
Good morning. Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and I appreciate the invitation and the time to speak with you. In Oregon, I am actually on the board of an analogous group called the Oregon Economic Development Association, and our organization is members of both the Oregon and the Washington Economic Development Associations because we're a bi-state region. So I applaud you for what you're doing, and you're giving some good ideas for our next conference coming up. So I appreciate that. Just to sort of reemphasize before I go into the presentation what we are a public-private nonprofit economic development organization that spans 7 counties and 2 states. So it's quite a large region, and we have a whole host of partners. We'll dive into this, but really we started before, our organization started before joining the Metropolitan Revolution. But it has really given a new added dimension to our work region that I'll talk about. So why exports? Amy has talked about this, and so I won't belabor the point, but exports are huge, and in our region they're especially significant. And these figures represent what we are right when we started this process, which was $21 billion in regional exports, and the goal was to double that to $42 billion. Why the doubling goal? It comes from really the birthplace of the Metropolitan Exporter Initiative, which is to turn into reality on the ground what the president challenged the nation to do, which is to double exports in 5 years. And what I find so exciting about the Metropolitan Exporter Initiative and the whole work with Brookings is that, as we saw with the flipped pyramid, it really is empowering local communities to make an impact on things that directly support the jobs and the quality of life in their communities. And so it doesn't dismiss any of the important things going on at the federal level or our federal partners, but it really embraces the reality that we have to make this change happen at our local level, and there are things that we could be doing that we haven't been. So if that's the big number, and then you boil it down a little bit more, using the Brookings economic modeling, they estimate that $1 billion is roughly about 5,000 jobs. It varies depending if you're talking service or manufactured exports, and also gets adjusted year to year. But if you took that figure, and if we were to hit this big, what I call, for those of you who read the Jim Collins book, Good to Great, the big, hairy, audacious goal of doubling exports, we would create or retain over 100,000 jobs. And that is just critical in an economy like ours, that while we've regained our jobs, to Amy's point, we have not yet regained the income that we want to see in our region to support the services and other aspects of our government that really provide the full range of what a community needs. And so we have embraced this not only as a goal for job growth, but also a long-term fundamental culture shift in what we're approaching. We see, and I say this as someone who comes from international, is in my blood. I've lived overseas. We used to work for the U.S. Department of State. I see international as critical, but what I and others in my partners' organizations are trying to do is make that just become, rather than an exotic aspect, but a fundamental part of the way we approach business. That global trade and investment is the economy now, and the consumers are overseas. The sources of capital are often overseas. And we need to be embracing that and looking at ways that we can bring all kinds of companies into that partnership. So this is kind of the high level, elevator speech, so-called, that we use about what we're trying to do. And really it's a transformative approach to addressing an issue that is critical to our economy, to say, what could we do about it to move that forward? And again, as I mentioned, this has traditionally been an area that has been left to the federal government because of the strong work of the U.S. Department of Commerce in providing assistance, or the U.S. Trade Representative in negotiating deals, other aspects of the federal government that provide financing, et cetera, or it has been the purview of the states. Many states, including both Oregon and Washington, provide strong export assistance to companies. But these are limited and have definitely not been growing lately. And there is an opportunity at the local level really to find a way to help your small, medium-sized companies get into this revolution, or to assist the larger ones in better connecting with those companies already in your community. So the Portland area looked at this back in 2011 and was interested in tackling the issue of exports and how would the city of Portland help companies get into this. And they looked around for models, and there really wasn't one at the municipal level. Coincidentally, at that same time, Brookings was just launching this process to how they could assist metros. And so our region applied and was fortunately selected as one of the pilots in this Metropolitan Export Initiative. It was led by the city and the city's economic development arm, the Portland Development Commission, who successfully applied and was selected as one of the 4 pilots. And after we were selected, they pulled in other partners who could really help make this happen. So they went through the process of a market assessment to see what was on the ground, what was the reality on the ground. Then they used the Brookings data and combined that to have the national with the local sort of reality check with customer interviews and company surveys and the like. Developed policy memos and strategies that came into this plan that you see here, and then the really hard work started, which is the implementation. This was before I was directly involved in the process, and what they decided to do, and I thought I'd delve in a little bit of this because I think it'll help those of you who may be contemplating projects like this, is they looked again to the regional model. And to the city of Portland's credit, they said for this to be long-term successful, we need to have this housed in a regional effort that had buy-in from different groups and that was really separate from the political fray. So our organization, which was fairly new at the time and was focused mostly around recruitment and marketing, was chosen as the natural landing place for the coordination and implementation of the effort. I came on board in 2012, and then basically was able to pick up the great work that all our predecessor groups had done and bring it to the implementation point. So that really involved bringing in a whole host of state, federal, and local partners, both private and public, to finalize not only the overarching strategy, but also a detailed business plan that said, okay, if this is our strategy, then here's our strategic action, and this is what we're going to try to accomplish, and this is the rough budget, and this is when we're planning to do it. Now, being a pilot, a lot of these have been, challenging, and so what we decided to do is really focus on the areas where we thought we could move the needle. We're not trying to reinvent things that are already being done well. So our strategy doesn't touch on some of the things that were already well honed. And we also deferred to other groups who really, on some of the transportation issues that were larger than just our region, because we could not have the same impact that they would. So we took that, we moved forward, and starting in the fall of 2012, started with the implementation. We have work groups that we set up for every strategic action under the main strategies. The idea being that we would spread it around the buy-in and the partnership between groups like the Port of Portland, which is our air and seaport, Business Oregon, which is the state Department of Commerce, effectively, Portland Development Commission, which is the largest city in our region's economic development arm, but also a whole host of other folks, including private consultants, smaller cities, counties, other economic development groups, to try to work together to, little by little, make headway on the things we had said we would set out to do. So I'm gonna dive in here just a little bit to explain what these are briefly, and then there's a short video which I think will help give a fuller explanation of what we're trying to do. But we established 4 main strategies, and those are leverage primary exporters, our primary exporter being computer electronics, housed around the semiconductor industry, where Intel has its largest facility. They're the #1 employer in the state of Oregon, private employer. The second is to catalyze under-exporters, thinking of your small, medium-sized businesses who export, but in a limited fashion, building the export pipeline to really enhance the capability to assist these companies, and then marketing our region and how we do business internationally. So let me now just pass to the video, which I think we'll dive into it a little bit more effectively. If I can get the video. There we go.
Greater Portland is a hub of the new global economy at the forefront of the Metropolitan revolution. The region is leading the way in implementing the goals of the National Export Initiative to expand American exports to overseas markets where 95% of the world's consumers live. In the last decade, Greater Portland was the second fastest growing export market among 100 major U.S. metro areas. Today, exports fuel over 24% of our regional economy.
If I could use Intel as an example, 75% of our manufacturing is done inside of the United States, but 75% of our revenue comes from outside the United States.
Nurturing export growth is the key to a vibrant, resilient economy, one that creates well-paying jobs and sustains successful businesses. In 2012, local business and elected leaders collaborated to craft an intentional export strategy that leverages our regional advantages to drive exponential growth.
The transformative goal was to define what our strengths were, what our market opportunities were overseas, and to become known for those things to the benefit of our citizens and to create jobs locally.
We set the bar high with a big, hairy, audacious goal, aiming to double exports in 5 years and create and retain over 103,000 new jobs for the region. Approximately 4,900 jobs for every $1 billion in new exports. To make our goal a reality, we created the Greater Portland Export Initiative in partnership with the Brookings Institution.
We stepped forward and in partnership with all the folks who helped do some of the early research and strategy work, then put the business plan together of saying, here's how this actually looks as an ongoing initiative over the next 3 years, and here's what it's going to take to actually get it done.
Top leaders from 35 public and private sector organizations guide the Greater Portland Export Initiative, with Greater Portland, Inc. as the quarterback.
We came to realize that the export initiative needed to be housed in a regional entity like Greater Portland, Inc.
Greater Portland, Inc. is the quarterback for the Greater Portland Export Initiative because we are uniquely placed to be the convener and the implementer on behalf of the region.
The initiative's business plan uses targeted working groups to implement 4 primary strategies: support and leverage key computer and electronics exporters, catalyze untapped sectors with high export potential, enhance the export pipeline by supporting small and medium-sized businesses, and brand and market Greater Portland's global edge, starting with sustainability. We made great progress in the first year of implementing the plan, from completing pivotal market studies to conducting export assistance training, and we're gearing up to tackle important new projects in our second year.
We're competing as metro areas all around the world. We've got to be able to organize ourselves at the metro level around the world to compete.
Greater Portland has what it takes to compete and lead: a sound strategy, a commitment to collaboration, and the vision to make exports a key part of the region's business culture. Working together, we'll double exports, create and retain over 103,000 well-paying jobs, and grow existing businesses in our region. The only thing missing is you. Join us in uniting regionally to compete globally.
So I hope that gives you a little better sense of what we've been trying to work on. And I'll just close with a couple of the accomplishments we've achieved thus far. One was a study that we did about how do you get computer and electronic parts from the west side of Portland to the airport where it's consolidated for freight or truck shipping. The findings of that study were incorporated into a U.S. Department of Transportation Tiger Grant application that just received $10 million in funding, partially for intelligent transportation systems to help route freight more effectively. We've also worked closely with cities and counties on building export counseling into their work, training them using Small Business Administration STEP funds, where we trained at the state, and then our partners, the statewide organization, trained outside the metro area, and again, partnering with the State Department of Commerce to help fund that. And then the branding about sustainability, we took the idea that we're a good, sustainable place to live and sort of flipped that on its head and used that as a tool to help our companies market their professional services overseas through the We Build Green Cities campaign. So I look forward to diving into more details in the question and answer period, and thank you again for the opportunity to speak before you.
Can you see me over this? Maybe I'll move out here. Okay. Hi, my name is Sandy Cedar. I'm the Assistant City Manager in Longmont, Colorado. Thank you. And I'm going to tell you a little story about my husband's hometown. I call it my husband's hometown because, like most of the 93,000 Longmonters, I'm an immigrant from the Midwest. So welcome to Longmont. We are a great Colorado community, originally settled as the Colorado Chicago colony. We were renamed Longmont after the prominent mountain in our beautiful view, and we are a very, very nice place to live. We have clean water, beautiful parks, an utterly charming downtown. And like a lot of other Front Range communities, Longmonters love our families, our festivals, and our beer. I don't know if Amy's still here, but these are all local people just 24 miles north. The story I'm going to tell you today about Longmont has a lot to do with our entrepreneurial spirit. Let me show you our location. You can kind of see it right there. Longmont is in the middle. We are 38 miles north of Denver, so we're not exactly a suburb and we're not a metro area. We also don't have any institutions of higher education that are state schools, 4-year institutions. We have a great community college, but we don't have CU or CSU like our neighbors to the south in Boulder and the north in Fort Collins. We're actually not even located on a central interstate, I-25, like our folks in Loveland and Frederick and Firestone and Dacono. We're actually literally just in the middle. But for being in the middle, we don't do too bad. We're a second city of sorts. We have the second lowest crime rate in Colorado. We have one of the second lowest cost of living along the Front Range. We have the second highest inventor patents in the state of Colorado. And according to our Twitter tweets, we're the second happiest city in the United States, just after Sonoma, which I think is because of the wine as opposed to the beer. So based on all these different pieces, how does a town, which looks a lot like the other towns sort of in the middle, use our entrepreneurial spirit to change the economic climate in Longmont? Well, it probably started 102 years ago when we started our own electric utility. Faced with a similar situation in 1912, kind of in the middle, not really getting great service and not getting reliable electric service, our founding fathers and mothers decided to put to a vote whether we should be the ones to run our own electric utility. At the time, this was pretty controversial because people weren't sure, well, what if it failed, the city running their own electric utility? And not only what if it failed, but what are you using taxpayer money for gambling like this anyway? And what is the right role of government? Is it really to provide this type of service? Voters still voted to establish the right to have our own electric utility, and it must have worked pretty well because within 24 hours we had 125 connections, and by the end of that week had 600 connections, pretty much the whole town at the time. In the 102 years since that time, Longmont's electric utility, now known as Longmont Power and Communications, has maintained their focus on responding to customers in our community. The utility has provided local control and ownership, lower rates, strong reliability, and focused customer service, because of course, we are the customers and we own ourselves, in essence. At the time, like I said, it seemed sort of wrong, but our founders believed that it was the role of government to provide the right infrastructure to allow our town to grow and to thrive. Today, we still have some of the lowest electric rates in the state and amongst the lowest overall utility rates. This is going to be important a little later in my story. More recently, faced with the same sort of middle syndrome that lots of towns face, we started to look at what we had and how we could build upon it. Since 1997, the city of Longmont has operated our own fiber optic backbone. This is a way for people to be able to push data through strands of glass at the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second. It's pretty fast. We originally started the Longmont broadband network as this electric backbone so that we could connect our electric substations to each other and be able to monitor what was happening around the town. But what started to happen was we realized that there were so many more applications for this broadband fiber optic loop. So we started to connect our own phone systems and our own computers in the city facilities. We started monitoring water and wastewater systems, and eventually creating enhanced communications for 911. At this time, we're starting to take a look at what types of things could we do outside of just those types of connections. At the time, 1997, remember, the internet was a brand new thing, kind of a new shiny product, and Mark Zuckerberg had not even yet made his first million in Facebook, which hadn't even been invented at the time. Communication infrastructure in the city was okay, but providers cherry-picked more expensive neighborhoods. So people that were starting to provide internet services really started to create their infrastructure in more elusive in more of the high-end neighborhoods of our town, while the lower-end areas of our town just remained kind of segregated in the digital divide. We realized that we needed to do something a little different. We started to ask our partners, some of the local providers of telecom services, whether they'd be willing to partner with us to be able to build out the system for all residents, but they refused. So we decided that we couldn't really wait for people to discover us. What we needed to do was create our own destiny. Our economy was relatively well diversified at the time. This is late 90s. Many high-tech and bioscience manufacturers in town, but we were starting to see them move to more central cities. Cities started giving incentives, really big incentives in some cases. And so we weren't really sure how to compete with that because lots of people were drawing businesses out of Longmont and creating new economies in their cities with these incentives. So our city officials struggled with the role of government once again. Should we provide gigantic incentives for these businesses to move into Longmont, or should we invest in our infrastructure instead? And so what they decided to do was similar to several years before. They decided to go ahead and invest in the infrastructure and start to provide high-speed communications to every resident and business in Longmont. But as in all good stories, there are lots of barriers to overcome. In 2005, the state legislation was passed that actually prohibited municipalities from providing telecom services to residents and businesses. Senate Bill 152, this is 2005 again, the argument at the time for Senate Bill 152, which did pass, was that what role of the government was it to provide telecom services? What if they failed? What would happen if you were using taxpayer money and gambling it on these very risky propositions? Sort of funny, sounded exactly like the arguments made 99 years ago when we were establishing our electric service. Senate Bill 152 did pass, but there was one caveat, and that was if the voters themselves decided that they wanted to build out their own telecom infrastructure, they could. So in 2009, we put that to a vote with our citizens, and interestingly enough, one of our local competitors spent $250,000 competing against the local ballot initiative. It failed, lots of commercials and direct mailings and all that kind of stuff, and so the council kind of reeled back on its heels and wondered if this was really the right way for us to go. But citizens started to call again, saying, can you provide the vote again? We were not really sure we understood what we were voting on. So in 2011, the city council went ahead and put that vote again to the citizens of Longmont, and it passed overwhelmingly. So this is 2011, when the citizens of Longmont voted to reestablish their right to be able to provide telecommunications service to the city of Longmont, 99 years after they did the same for electric utilities. Okay, so let's move forward a couple years to, let's just go to last year. In 2013, the voters then approved the funding to actually build out the entire broadband network. This is what the phasing looks like. They actually started construction 2 months ago. So you'll see that hopefully by the end of 2016, every resident, every business will have access to high-speed fiber to the home and to business infrastructure in Longmont. So what? Why is that important to our economy? I think you've been hearing a lot today about the importance of high tech and being able to move data forward and create valuable jobs. As the world becomes more virtual, people are able to work, invent, and invest remotely. And so the speed of communication is important. Fiber optics literally work at the speed of light, only restricted by the technology on either end. So our residents will enjoy 1 gigabit service to every home and up to at least 10 to 20 for commercial users. What that means is right now, if I were to download a movie at my home with a 10 megabit connection, it would take about 2 hours. Once I'm hooked up to the gigabit network, I'm in phase 4. Once I'm connected to the gigabit network, it will take 2 seconds to download that same movie. So what does that mean? Rather than just not being patient, so what does that mean for Longmont specifically? Well, remember those entrepreneurs that I told you about at the beginning, the ones that were inventing and investing and all that? Imagine if you owned a computerized mapping technology service and you had to really speed huge data connections all the way across the country. Imagine what it would mean to you if you could provide that at a lower cost than most. What if you were a medical imaging company and you could actually send huge medical images to the hospital and it get there before the helicopter does? What if you're the 8th largest school district in the state of Colorado and you have the job of making sure that our children are trained for jobs that don't yet exist? What if you're a data storage company, or actually any company that stores data? The combination of fast internet connection and low electric rates is something that will attract folks and have been attracting folks to our community. So you may get better incentives somewhere else, and sometimes that boost fades as time marches on. The solid infrastructure, clean water, reliable electricity, affordable super high-speed broadband, and a great place for your employees to live and thrive is the gift that keeps on giving and will drive our local economy. So welcome to Longmont. Situated at the intersection of high technology and infrastructure and manufacturing, Longmont exemplifies the best of the Front Range, offering a high quality of life, skilled workforce, business-friendly climate, while remaining affordable and welcoming. So although we're still in the middle, we're quickly turning that to being in the middle of it all.
I'll start with a confession, which is that I have drunk from the Brookings Kool-Aid as well, like the other panelists. And I especially like the Metropolitan Revolution, and I'll say that the chapter on Denver is my second favorite chapter in the book. Of course, the Northeast Ohio chapter is the one that really zings, but the one on Denver is one that I have brandished far and wide in Northeast Ohio, because it really explores what happens when government can find a way to come together and work and build trust and set aside provincial interests to do something big. So please don't disabuse me of the wonderful story that's laid out in the chapter. If it didn't exactly occur that way, I don't want to know, because it's such a great story. It works just as it is. As I was thinking about what might be of interest from my experience to the world that you live in, I was struck by the basic choice of focusing on the what versus the how. And it struck me that there's probably all kinds of interesting things around the what of an economic strategy, but the how may be more relevant. And in fact, I'd assert that we're in the middle of this great sociological experiment in the United States as we are refashioning the way that civic decisions and resource allocation is occurring, and we're all kind of grappling and feeling like we're only midstream in this process here that we really don't know what it'll look like on the other end. So I'd like to focus in on that, and I'll leave you with 3 ideas, and I got some slides that'll describe a little bit about the fund and who we are. But the first idea is In the discussion of economic development, which we actually call economic competitiveness as opposed to development, trying to take a more expansive definition, that philanthropy may be a secret weapon. And I wonder if you have tapped into that as a secret weapon here in terms of being another party at the table to work on these issues. That's the organization that I'm from, comes from philanthropy. We represent about $7 billion of assets in Northeast Ohio, putting about $350 to $400 million into the community, traditionally along those classic philanthropic missions. As I just pulled up what I saw in Colorado, I see that you've outpaced us in terms of the amount of philanthropic assets that you have in the giving. And so I'd be interested in learning more about how you have made room, if at all, for philanthropy at your table. Idea number two is this idea of working in collaboration. And our own experience is that we've had to make stone soup in Northeast Ohio because there is no one player that can allow us to become competitive on a national stage. But it's easy to talk collaboration. It's a lot harder to figure out what the table ought to look like. Who ought to be at the table? How do you get them to commit? And how do you build trust? And that will be particular to each and every community. I'll tell you what we've done. And then number three is this idea of achieving change through a networked-based approach as opposed to a top-down approach. And the grim realization that we faced in Northeast Ohio is that no one is in charge anymore. And once you embrace the idea that no individual, no institution is in charge, that changes the way that we come to decisions and conclusions. So, who are we? We're a collaboration of the funding community working on long-term issues of economic competitiveness. Our history initially started with a group of traditional foundations who looked at the state of the economy and said, what should we do about that? We've grown to the point now where we have some 50 different funding entities that have pooled their resources in order to work on these issues. And that includes traditional foundations as well as corporate giving programs, educational institutions, healthcare foundations, business associations, and so forth. Over the last decade, we have pooled and deployed over $100 million of money that has flowed through us. Our members have done sidecar grants of an additional $100 million, and then we've leveraged that by a factor of 10, about $2 billion, into the priorities of our fund. One of the advantages of philanthropic money is, as you may well know, is that it can be a different kind of money. It's minuscule compared to the public resources that are available, but philanthropic money can be that early, ugly, flexible money that can catalyze a lot of the other kinds of investments. In listening to Amy's remark, and she was telling us about the complexity of Chicago, and what did she mention here? That it had some 554 municipalities and 2 metropolitan planning organizations, and I thought to myself, man, it's easy in Illinois. We have 587 municipalities and 5 MPOs. And so the lesson that we've learned, and I know it's equally complex here in the Front Range, is that while we are one economy regionally, we are still multiple entities with our own identities and accountabilities and authorities that we are trying to bring together to make this work. And in Northeast Ohio, as we looked at it, we realized that we're not Lilliputians. We do have Case Western Reserve University and the Cleveland Clinic and the University of Akron, and we have a NASA site and so forth. So we're not Lilliputians, but we're not Gulliver either. We don't have a Gulliver. We don't have a Procter & Gamble, or we don't have an INREL or something like that. So we have found that we have to pool our resources if we're going to be able to compete effectively. And what we've tried to do, again, is to stitch that together across these 4 metropolitan areas, which is, you know from my guess is your own experience, is extraordinarily complex to do. The way we do it, by the way, is we have people pay in to be a member of the fund, and we align our resources, and it's one institution, one vote, and we work across about a 16 to 18 county area. Our lens on the world is that we are focusing in on three areas. Job creation, so it gets at more of the classic definitions of economic development, things like cluster development, entrepreneurial ecosystem development and such. And then connecting that with job preparation, overhauling workforce systems, working at the strategic level of workforce as well as at the tactical level, and then bringing into that as well job access issues, because we've learned that not every job is created equally, and that we mustn't be spatially agnostic. And we've been spatially agnostic for too long in Northeast Ohio, and the people who need the jobs the most can't get to them. And so now we're trying to knit together these three camps through specific initiatives who don't normally talk to each other to come together on a set of capabilities. Our approach, and each of these could be a presentation in its own light, but I won't do that, is that we are trying to focus on fundamental transformation of the economy as opposed to near-term gains. The high watermark for my community was 1952. And so something that took 50 years to unfold, we're expecting that we're on a 20 to 30-year journey to get ourselves where we want to be. Second is we are trying to meld the regional to the local. We're not asking people to give up their local identity. Instead, we're saying, how do we connect local assets to the regional economy and figuring out what are the systems involved in order to do that. Thirdly, is we spend an extraordinary amount of time trying to integrate initiatives that may be around a cluster with what that backs up into in terms of the workforce systems we have, and then how that links into our transportation dollars and planning. We may get into that in the questions if that's of interest. And then as I intimated earlier, we're trying to do this through a networked-based approach where we no longer designate sort of the classic entity that is in charge of what's going on, but instead we fashion them as a backbone group who's responsible for coordinating a set of players. And the way our funding flows is we're looking for network outcomes as opposed to single institution outcomes. Our role at the fund is threefold. One is we are trying to create this table where we can get the relevant players to come together on a set of issues, whether that be a workforce reform, a cluster, entrepreneurship, and so forth. Second is then we'll try to back that up, and the reason people listen to us is that we will make grants or investments in those areas. And then third is we're trying to give a philanthropic voice to what is going on in the community. And we think that philanthropy has a lot to add, especially as it relates to these issues of poverty and economic justice and so forth. Case in point of how it works is in the area of manufacturing. This is a major priority for Northeast Ohio. And we have our manufacturing extension partnership has completely refashioned itself so that it is playing this backbone role in a group, a constellation of community resources. And our belief is that it takes a village to raise a company. And so what Magnet, the name of the organization, has done is it sits at the hub of all of our higher education as well as a set of intermediaries to try to assemble and bring together the best of what the region has into an individual company. And what we found was that our small and mid-sized manufacturers, it was brain death for them to try to negotiate with each and every university and so forth. And so Magnet plays this concierge role. An example of the success of that is Vadex. It's a company that converts plastics into petroleum. It was born in a publicly funded incubator in Akron. It worked with Magnet to access all these technical skills at the universities. It worked with another one of our intermediaries to get connected with Rockwell Automation, and then it received funding from yet another regional intermediary focused on entrepreneurial development. This company is now kind of revenue positive and well on its way to being a highly successful company that had all parts of the region coming together around its success. So, the final slide was to say we feel really good about where we've come, but we know we've got an extraordinary long way to go, and the area where we have fallen short is on this issue of economic opportunity. We've turned the corner in terms of where we're going as a region, but we've left way too many people behind. Roughly 1 in 20 of our residents are disconnected from the regional economy, and that's our priority going forward. We have a whole set of initiatives that are built around going after that. The important, I guess, message here that I'll leave you with is that we have taken as a new top-line measure, we look at jobs, payroll, capital, and we've added the fourth, is we're trying to understand what is the labor force participation rate in our economically distressed neighborhoods. And so we have a goal of not just lifting the whole economy, but making sure our most vulnerable neighborhoods are getting connected to the regional economy. So that's the skinny on Northeast Ohio, and we'll look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
I'm going to turn my chair a little bit so I can see these guys. All right. Now is our opportunity for some dialogue with these panelists. I want to make sure that we allow time for both audience questions, and I have some planned questions to stimulate some dialogue. I had planned to go through some of my questions first, but to make sure we don't run out of time and give you guys enough opportunity to ask questions, are there any questions right now? Does anybody want to lob a question? You can be for all of them or targeted towards a specific panelist, and we do have somebody available with a microphone, or I'll repeat the question if you can't be heard. I can't see in the back there. Oh, there we go. Thank you.
Hi.
Yes, please.
Hi, good morning. Thank you all for your comments. This is Jeff Kraft from the Office of Economic Development and International Trade. I have a question for Pamela about the Innovation District in Detroit. And I wanted to know what you're finding. You're investing a lot of resources in a small geographic area. And what are you finding in terms of how that's able to spread out and impact, other parts of Detroit besides the district?
Thank you for that question. That is a tension that we struggle with. I think Brad hit on it as well. Right now, Detroit is at risk of actually looking like two different cities. So the activity that's happening in Midtown and downtown and the lack of development happening in the neighborhoods. What we've been doing with our funding through New Economy Initiative, as well as a very strong thread within the Innovation District work, is how do we build the bridges to make sure that the people in the neighborhoods are getting access to the assets that are functioning in the district. For example, the incubator TechTown that I mentioned, sure, they help a lot of early stage startups that are in tech and IT, but they just launched a program called SWAT, where they're focused on supporting small businesses within the neighborhoods. And so they're taking their services out of Midtown and downtown and building satellite offices in neighborhoods as a perfect example of that. The other thing had to do with the conversations we're having around, in Detroit, because we don't have a public transit system, for a lot of individuals, it actually takes 4 bus rides and an hour and a half just to get from their house into the downtown area. And so that is becoming a key conversation at our table. We can't ignore that fact. And that M1 rail is only 3 miles. That's not going to really cut it. So what are some of the commuting, bike share, mobility type of conversations that we can do to start to bridge those gaps? But we are at risk of looking at like 2 cities. But there's an intentional effort to build those bridges from the assets in the district to the neighborhoods, and to also create on-ramps for those youth that live in those areas to have access to the district resources.
Good question. Another question from the audience? If there isn't one right now, I'll go to my list. Let me ask this question to Derek regarding the Portland experience. Now, your experience was really focused on export, obviously traditionally a very federal government-centric role. Why is it important for cities and regions to sort of step in and take on that role for something like that that's such a traditional federal government role?
Thank you.
The key to me really is that many of these cities and counties and other economic development organizations are already having business retention, expansion type conversations with companies in their area. And there is a strong untapped opportunity to weave exports into that, because essentially exports is about growing your sales just in a different market, which will help you retain your company and ideally grow and then add jobs. And so we saw a fundamental opportunity to add that to when there's discussions on workforce or industrial lands or permitting or other conversations that you're having with those companies, to pull that into the discussion. And we've seen that many small, medium-sized companies are receptive of that, because even though there are these state and federal resources out there or private consultants, it's very hard for them to navigate them. It can be an alphabet soup of organizations. Even for someone who is very familiar with them, it can be challenging. And so if you have a city or county or nonprofit staff that's up to speed with those, they don't have to be an expert in all the programs, but they can know enough to direct the companies to the right areas so that they can get the target assistance at the stage that they're in. So we see that as it's a fairly low cost way to leverage these great services and connect the companies with them, rather than to sort of sit back and wait for companies to hit a problem and then go seek out the services and not be able to find the right one.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, please.
Oh, I'd be curious to know, given that we have so many economic developers in the audience as well, is that as we move from what Amy was talking about, competing on cost and with incentives, to competing on value, at least it's been our experience that as we move to that value-based conversation, we need a new set of interface with the company. And not that a government agency can't do that, but it's not set up as well to do that. So while it sounds perhaps inefficient, we have seen that creating private sector focused customer interfaces that then can access the government resources allows us to have a different kind of conversation with the company. And so we've done that in entrepreneurship. We're now doing that in business development and expansion, and we're doing it in a lot of our cluster work. And it cost us in each of these cases a couple of $1 million a year, but we see that that's an investment worth making.
Great point. And so on the idea of investment, you looked at incentives versus investment in Longmont and clearly chose investment. Maybe could you talk a little bit about that choice and how you collaborated with other partners to capitalize on and leverage that investment? For example, the school district, or what other partners might be involved?
Thank you. I appreciate that question. You know, it's interesting because that's definitely been the balance that a lot of certainly elected officials have dealt with. In the city of Longmont, one of the things that we did more recently was we kind of had that split that you're talking about. Our Longmont Area Economic Council was really dealing with primary employers. The city had an economic development department and was working with small business. And what we went through was a target industry study, and part of that really showed that the Economic Alliance would be a better place for those kinds of interfaces rather than the local government. And exactly what you said is exactly what we've done. So we actually, I would say dismembered, because it kind of felt like a dismemberment of our Economic Development Department, and turned all of those responsibilities over to the Longmont Area Economic Council. And so what we're starting to see is a whole new way of doing partnership, and hopefully being able to poise the Economic Council in a way that they are really that interface for private companies and are able to access the city government to be able to provide then the infrastructure that's needed for the different businesses. A big piece of that is our school district. The St. Vrain Valley School District is almost the 8th largest in Colorado and does span larger than just Longmont. It's a lot of the communities around us, partner communities around us. They recently got a $16.5 million Race to the Top grant to fund their innovation center, which comes after their STEM high school, which they created quite a few years ago. And so what we realized very quickly was that they needed the high-speed internet connection, the low electric rates, just as much as every business does. And so in the training of all of these kids for these jobs, we started providing broadband service to them at the beginning of this year, and they almost immediately connected 20,000 devices to the network. It was amazing. And part of that was giving every middle schooler an iPad. that's a fun process. But those kinds of partnerships, we really think are the right role, right? The right role of government is the infrastructure role in partnering with those with better interfaces on the private side, and then really helping and supporting the school district to do their job to create the skilled workforce that's needed to be the backbone of the economy.
Awesome, thank you. Anybody want to add to that? Going once, going twice? Okay. I have another question in the audience. Please go ahead.
Hi, Carolyn. This is Susan Grafton. I'm with the City of Westminster, and thank you to the panelists for sharing your comments and helping us all think about different ways of doing things. I do have a question for Brad and maybe others that are at the table. Brad, you were particularly talking about with your economic future group that it's a network-based group, or that you have this networking. My concern as I look at all of us trying to fundraise and we're trying to do this networking and bringing people to the table that actually don't know much about economic development but have a great love of the community, is how do you balance the need for having economic development practitioners at the table that actually understand the long-term economic development needs maybe of a community with those that we need to help fund those efforts. So how do you balance that? Just curious about it.
Interesting question.
Yeah, it's a great question, and by the way, it seems like you got the wind at your back here in Westminster, so congratulations on all of that. I said at the outset, this is this big sociological experiment that we're undertaking now as we try to refashion how all this works. I think one of the things I would, or a couple of points. One is that being collaborative and network-based doesn't mean that it's accountability-free. A lot of this network stuff is, if you don't do it well, it's so squishy and it doesn't go anywhere, and they become talk fests. And so we try to invest a lot of time on shared metrics and milestones for our funding that is linked to that. And then the point you raise is a huge point. And the question is, who do you get in the room and who's playing what role? And then we invest very heavily in the leader, but the leader that we invest behind is a servant leader as opposed to the kind of visionary leader in the sort of thing, who will draw out and see themselves as an orchestra conductor as opposed to a first violinist. And the old model we've had of the leader has been the concertmaster, the first violinist. And this new leadership one is this way. And then we start asking, well, who knows about pure economic development? Oh, well, it's these people here. But oh, by the way, these people who've been living in the neighborhoods have a lot to bring as well. And that's just a case of paying up for facilitation. And so we're comfortable paying high salaries to these leaders. We catch a lot of grief in the press about that, but it's such a tricky job, that facilitation job, and so we'd say invest in the right kind of leader.
Can I add to that?
Please, yeah, Pam.
It's a great question. With the New Economy Initiative, which was made up of these 11 funders, we actually restarted for the second phase of our initiative and actually unseated the steering committee because of that very reason. The steering committee was made up of all the funders who were funding the initiative, and we were, using the thread of entrepreneurship for job creation and dealing with economic development principles, and we found we had to actually reseat the guiding table for that initiative. So we've included economic development players, we've included entrepreneurs, as well as funders. But we're actually using the Innovation District platform to really make sure that all the right folks are at the table when we're talking about these types of things. And so we don't just have the Michigan Economic Development Corporation leaders there. We also have the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation there, which is our local economic development arm. But we also have the presidents of the anchors, the presidents of the universities, including Michigan State and Wayne State, because their students want to come to Detroit, as well as the entrepreneurial service providers and the people that are actually doing the place-making development work. There's a whole lot of impatience right now in the city for long-term plans the push is about, whatever we do, we got to see something tangible come out of this within 18 to 24 months. And within that, we found that we actually had to kind of course correct and reseat some tables to make sure that they were inclusive with people that actually know the work. We actually focused on reseating them to make sure they were inclusive in terms of women and minorities as well, which is a very intentional effort that doesn't always happen.
Great point. Do I have any more? Okay, I've got
There's a
another.
question
Oh,
right there.
wait, I don't see it.
To your left. Oh.
Aha. Can we get a microphone over there?
Hey, Carolyn, Frank Gray, Castle Rock, EDC. I actually have two questions I'm going to ask. And so one is for Derek. Colorado's landlocked, right? You guys have a port there. And so tell us what your aha moment was when you realized that, if you were talking to folks here in Colorado and you said, well, here's the one thing you could do to help, the biggest thing you could do to help your exports in Colorado or help your exports in general. What was the aha moment there? So I think that was my question for you. And then for Brad and for Pam, can you speak a little bit more about how the philanthropic aspect of both of your plans kind of came to be and how you engaged that philanthropic aspect? Because I think there's a lot of the latter of what you talked about, civic engagement, economic development engagement, private sector engagement, but I don't think here in the Metro Denver area the philanthropic piece has been tapped as strongly as what you guys sound like you're doing in your communities. So those are my two questions.
Let's start with Derek, aha moment question.
Sure. Well, and this is where I think where Brookings and through the Global Cities Initiative with JP Morgan Chase, that partnership has been transformative because they took a fresh look at export statistics that has really led to the federal government now taking a fresh look, because traditionally export statistics are from where the port it is shipped out as opposed to where the good is produced, which leads to wide distortions. And for instance, there's a lot of potash fertilizer that gets shipped through the Port of Portland, but it is not produced in our area. It comes from the Midwest or the Plains States or Canada. And so when you look at the statistics in a different way, it enables you to better hone in on what is really being produced in your region and then how you can attack those better as far as providing assistance. And in a related note, I would say that many of the companies that are in your region, they may not be direct exporters, but they're what are called secondary exporters, where they're in the supply chain of another company that's exporting. And so they have just as much of a stake in the international economy, even if on the surface they are sending it to a company in Texas or down the street in Denver or to Portland or whatever, that if they're in that supply chain, they're part of the international economy. So I think that was another sort of a related part. And so I encourage you to take a look at Brookings. It has a profile for this metro area and for other of the top 100 metro areas. And you can see the breakdown in those industries and where there might be some areas that you could hone in and help the growth of that supply chain, whether it's directly or indirectly the export.
Okay, for Pam and Brad, the philanthropic engagement question.
Okay, so rock, paper, scissors, ladies first? Okay.
Go ahead.
Great question. Where are you? So for Detroit, you've heard the old adage, necessity is the mother of invention. 2007, 2008, 10 of the 11 funders came together because, half of the manufacturing jobs that were lost in the country actually were lost in Southeast Michigan. So that part of the country took an enormous hit. The poverty level is right now 45%. I mean, it's bad. Unemployment rates have been really high. So the philanthropists, basically, it was led by Miriam Nolan, who runs the Community Foundation. She built the Community Foundation over the last 25 years. And basically gathered her friends and said, we have to do something. I mean, we're investing, we're making grants to education and arts, but what's the point? It's like putting money with a bag with holes in it. And we need to do something to address the economic development issue here. So they weren't asked to the table, they just decided to coordinate themselves and do that. And that's how NEI got launched. But the role that we've been playing, the slide that Brad put up, is the exact same role that we're doing, right? We're leveraging the fact that we're strategic grant makers with $100 to $140 million of dollars that we can grant, that gets you into a lot of meetings. And it allows you to convene in a way that is neutral. It allows you to play between the government and also the private players, because you are about civic engagement, and it allows you to ask harder questions and call harder questions around inclusion and put money in those areas that the economic development agencies aren't necessarily focused on. And so, but it was the necessity that was happening in our city that drove the philanthropists, one leader to say, we got to do something. And they all came along. And Ford and Kresge, who are national foundations, joined the table, as well as others. And they did it again just recently with the whole bankruptcy issue, right, with the Detroit Institute of Arts and the pension issue with the city workers. Philanthropy, once again, led by the same group of people, you know, they did it again. So again, it's just out of necessity, but they weren't asked.
Yeah,
Brad?
I'd underline that. I never thought I'd hear myself saying that, but Pam and I, we had a comparative advantage. We hit bottom.
Yep, so true.
A decade ago, it was really bad, really, really bad. Although, probably worse in Detroit. There's this great viral video that was made, I don't know, a decade ago. It talked about all the things that were wrong in Cleveland, but the tagline at the end was, "At least we're not Detroit." I took great solace in that. But I guess that meant that's why we didn't get the National Foundation money. So I don't, it will be a trick to get philanthropy to the table, but I think that the handle that you have, we spent a lot of time just going from philanthropy to philanthropy, saying this is, if not now, then when, if not us, then who, for the situation. And then talked about economic development being too important to be left only in the hands of the economic developers. I think the handle that we all have right now is this phenomena Amy talked about with the economic polarization and mobilization that will appeal to any of the philanthropic community who's worried about social service. And my guess is they're having a lot of board conversation about what's not working with the traditional social service models. And the answer that you bring is because we can't have a growth camp here and we can't have an opportunity camp here and expect to solve the polarization issues. We need to create a new camp of growth and opportunity, and I think that's your message to bring to your philanthropic community.
That's good, good. There was another question over here in the pink jacket. Yeah.
Hi, Jessica Erickson with the Colorado Office of Economic Development and International Trade. My question is for Derek. One of our strategies, or part of our economic development strategy at the state and regional level, is around key industries and key industry networks, and how we create environments for collaboration within those industries and across industries. And I think the We Build Green Cities program is an excellent example of how that kind of strategy can be successful. So I was hoping you could maybe go into a little bit more detail about that program and how it came to be, and the success that you've experienced there.
Sure, thank you. So We Build Green Cities, the idea was born that we're known nationally and to some extent internationally for being a sustainable city, both on placemaking, but also on new technologies and energy efficiency. And we, as a community, came up with this idea that the Portland Development Commission, took and ran with to create a collaboration between private industry and the public sector to, again, use this as a marketing tool for our companies in overseas markets, because we have a steady stream of folks who come through, and actually there's an office at Portland State University that does nothing but help arrange tours called First Stop Portland, because we have so many people coming through and looking Portland as a sustainable city. And so it's just really, it's sort of taking that model on the road, but then focusing on metropolitan areas that are making decisions about planning or development where they need that expertise. And it involves some medium-sized firms, but also a large one, ZGF, who's headquartered in Portland. And they, so we're able to use the existing governmental connections and cultural connections in Japan to open some doors with companies, which then led to an MOU between this consortium of folks under the We Build Green Cities and a real estate developer in Japan. And then they now have somebody who's in Portland looking at projects and learning from that while the folks in Portland are preparing for a project in Japan. So it's still sort of in the early stages, but and to be long-term successful, we'll continue to need that private sector involvement and support. But it's been, I think, an exciting way to take a community's strengths and to market it outwards. And I encourage you to look at that. I know San Diego has done some interesting stuff along those lines with bio, as well as Minneapolis, St. Paul has done some work on biotech and others, just based on their strengths, and how do you then take it overseas.
Awesome. One more chance for the audience, and then I have a couple of closing questions for the panel if there's no more audience questions. We have one back here. Okay, please go ahead.
Well, thank you, panel. I appreciate your time today. My name is Tom Livingston with the Jefferson County Economic Development Corporation. And my question for any of the panel, we continue to talk about STEM education and the importance of innovation and technology. And here in Jefferson County, we meet with businesses that say that they continue to struggle to find skilled workers, labor workforce, for their companies. And I'm wondering, in each of your communities, how you handle the balance of trying to find and develop that labor workforce as opposed to the entrepreneurship aspect for innovation and technology and creating that workforce. And if there's a way that you balance that, maybe Pam, more specific with, in the manufacturing industry and having those skilled labor employees there, how you balance between the two to create that.
Anyone?
I'll try to answer that. Again, you're hitting another tension area within our work, because the K through 12 education issue in Detroit is severe. What we've been doing, NEI actually made a decision, which was not an easy one, that we did not want to focus our dollars in that area. That we wanted to focus them on entrepreneurship, and we wanted to focus them on helping the small businesses in the communities that those youth live in to get those up to par through business development. What's starting to happen, though, around the Innovation District table is how do we leverage some of the organizations that are already engaged in the schools, like the Detroit Area Pre-College Engineering Program. We're starting to see coding classes happening with some of the district assets. There's a for-profit organization called Grand Circus that's a co-working space, but they partnered with some very some communities within Detroit that have very severe problems, where they're actively offering coding classes, not just to youth, but actually the adults, to help bridge that gap. So there's a lot of discussion around STEM. For our work, we've gotten a lot of negative reaction to our intentional decision to not focus in that space, but that's because we felt that we could make more of an impact by dealing with the business development and the adult side of it. And that was a very hard decision to make, and we've caught a lot of flack from that, but we're leaving the discussion in terms of on-ramps to the district assets, on-ramps to innovation and commercialization fields through some of the other programs that are active in the city.
Brad, and then Derek, we have 2 minutes left, panel.
So we're crazy. We're wandering into that minefield. And what we have found is that particularly as it relates to manufacturing, is to be quite intentional about making manufacturing and those sorts of jobs an attractive thing. Because what does a parent tell their kid? Don't go into the factory, because they have this image of what it is, and we're trying to come out with a marketing campaign that is a good career. And we all have been praying to the God of BA attainment, right? And that it's all about that. And what we're learning and saying is that vocational training and apprenticeships is hugely important in this economy as well, and we need to be promoting and pursuing that. And then finally, I'd say, is we're working with companies on something we're really excited about right now called skills-based hiring, where we're finding that companies are screening applicants based upon credentials that aren't particularly relevant to the job. And so there are a number of tools, WorkKeys is one of them and so forth, where you can look at the competencies required, administer a test to people who need jobs. And what we have found, or what they found in New Mexico, we're importing it to Ohio, is that it expands the pool of labor by a factor of 33 through that sort of competency-based hiring as opposed to credential-based hiring. So there's a lot of good stuff going on.
I love that. Derek, you have about 1 minute.
Sure. We take a twofold approach. It's essentially on issues like workforce and others where there's the immediate attacking the problem that comes up with an employer or a community and pulling together those partners, which has included a closer working relationship with the workforce community. And much like with the export initiative, looking in the short to medium term. But then we're also at the same time launching this process called Greater Portland 2020, which has, to the comments we were talking about earlier, a diverse group of stakeholders at the table who often aren't in those discussions about where they vision the community going, having an outside consultant come in and looking at the data and telling us some hard truths about what's working, but what isn't working, or what could be done better in competition. And so we're able to, on a practical day-by-day aspect, affect the immediate and the short, medium term, whereas with this planning, we're able to look at where do we envision our community and how are the partners going to execute a plan to get us there.
Great, thank you. Would you join me, please, in thanking our panel?